The sun beat down mercilessly on the endless line of wagons stretching across the Texas horizon. Dust hung in the air like a brown fog, coating everything: the mules, the drivers, the precious cargo wrapped in burlap. From a distance, the wagon train looked like a massive serpent slithering southward through the scrubland, its body made of creaking wood and sweating animals instead of scales. This wasn't just any cargo. These wagons carried the white gold of the South. Cotton bales stacked so high they swayed dangerously with every rut in the road. And this wasn't just any journey. This 6 to 8 week trek from the plantations of East Texas to the Mexican border was a desperate gamble, a race against time, bandits, drought, and the tightening noose of Union blockade ships patrolling the Gulf Coast. Welcome to the Cotton Road, where the Confederacy's economic survival rolled forward on wooden wheels, one agonizing mile at a time. While newspapers in Richmond and Washington shouted headlines about great armies clashing in Virginia and Tennessee, a different kind of war was being fought in Texas. A war of economics, geography, and sheer, stubborn determination. The Union's Anaconda Plan had wrapped its coils around the Confederacy, with Navy ships blockading every major southern port from Virginia to Louisiana. The South was being strangled, cut off from the world's markets and the war supplies it desperately needed. But Texas had something no other Confederate state possessed: a border with Mexico. The Rio Grande River, winding through the dusty borderlands, represented more than just the southern edge of Texas. It was a loophole in the Union's stranglehold. That brown, sluggish river was neutral territory, international waters where Union warships couldn't legally go. And on the other side lay Matamoros, a Mexican town that was about to become one of the most important places in the entire Confederate war effort. The plan was both simple and audacious: haul cotton from Texas plantations overland to the Mexican border, ferry it across the Rio Grande to Matamoros, then ship it from the port at Baghdad to European textile mills hungry for southern cotton. The money from those sales would buy rifles, ammunition, medicine, and all the other supplies the Confederacy couldn't make for itself. On paper, it sounded straightforward. In reality, it was a grueling test of human and animal endurance. In the plantation regions of East Texas, enslaved workers loaded massive bales of cotton, each weighing between 400 and 500 pounds, onto sturdy freight wagons. These weren't the small farm wagons you might imagine. These were heavy-duty freight haulers, built tough enough to survive the punishment of the trail. Most were pulled by teams of oxen, though some used mules. The animals had to be strong, patient, and able to survive on whatever sparse grass and water they could find along the way. San Antonio became the great gathering point, the place where individual wagons joined together into massive trains for safety and mutual support. Imagine standing on the outskirts of San Antonio in 1863 and watching what seemed like a city on wheels assembling itself. Hundreds of wagons, thousands of mules and oxen, teamsters shouting and cursing, wheels creaking, harnesses jingling, all preparing for the long push south. A teamster named Carlos Rodriguez, driving for one of the cotton merchants, might check his wagon one last time before departure. He'd inspect every wheel hub, every axle, every inch of harness. One broken wheel in the middle of nowhere could mean disaster. He'd pack extra water barrels, more precious than gold in the country ahead, and whatever food wouldn't spoil in the brutal heat. Then, at the wagon master's signal, the train would lurch into motion. The route led southwest from San Antonio, through what locals grimly called the Nueces Strip, a harsh, unforgiving land that seemed designed to break the spirit of travelers. This wasn't the green, gentle countryside of the East. This was a land of thorny mesquite trees, prickly pear cactus, and rocky soil baked hard as brick by the relentless sun. The teamsters and wagon guards had to stay alert for dangers that could come from any direction. Bands of outlaws haunted the trail, eager to steal valuable cotton or the money and supplies being hauled back north. Some were Confederate deserters, some were Union sympathizers, and some were simply criminals taking advantage of the war's chaos. They knew the wagon trains carried wealth, and they weren't particular about how they took it. Native American raiding parties also posed a threat. The Comanche and other groups had been fighting against Texan expansion for decades, and the war had pulled away many of the soldiers who usually patrolled the frontier. This created opportunities for raids, and the slow-moving wagon trains, focused on the hard work of travel, could be tempting targets. But perhaps the cruelest enemy was the land itself. Water was scarce in the Nueces Strip. When the wagons reached a creek or water hole, it might be dried up, forcing them to push on with dwindling water supplies. Men would ration their canteens, taking tiny sips that barely wet their throats while the sun hammered down from a cloudless sky. Dust storms could blow up suddenly, turning day into a brown twilight where you couldn't see the wagon 20 feet ahead. The fine dust got into everything: eyes, mouths, lungs, food, water barrels. Men would tie bandanas around their faces, but still they'd cough and spit brown. And if a wagon broke down, the train couldn't wait long. Time was money, and every day on the trail increased the chances of disaster. A teamster with a shattered axle or a lame ox team might have to abandon his wagon, salvage what he could, and continue on foot, or beg a ride with another driver. After 6 to 8 weeks of grinding hardship, the wagon trains finally reached Brownsville and looked across the Rio Grande at their destination, Matamoros, Mexico. What they saw must have seemed like a vision from another world. Matamoros had exploded from a sleepy border town into a boom town practically overnight. Warehouses lined the riverbank, stacked to the rafters with cotton bales waiting to be loaded onto ships. The streets bustled with merchants from across the globe: British traders, French businessmen, New England ship captains, Mexican officials, Confederate agents, and opportunists of every nationality, all drawn by the scent of profit. The transformation was staggering. Before the war, trade between the United States and Mexico along this border totaled roughly $7 million a year. By 1863, it had jumped to $12 million. By war's end, it would reach an astounding $22.6 million. The Cotton Road hadn't just survived, it had created an economic miracle in the middle of the desert. The actual crossing of the Rio Grande was almost anticlimactic after the long journey. Ferry operators, often working for merchants like Charles Stillman, Mifflin Kennedy, and Richard King, who would later found the famous King Ranch, would pull flatboats loaded with cotton bales across the muddy water. Some cotton was simply floated across, bales lashed together like rafts. Once on Mexican soil, the cotton legally became Mexican property through a clever trick. The bales would be sold to Mexican citizens, often just on paper, so that when they were loaded onto ships at the port of Baghdad, where the Rio Grande met the Gulf of Mexico, they were officially Mexican goods. This made them immune to seizure by Union warships, which couldn't legally interfere with neutral Mexican trade. The economics of the Cotton Road created fortunes that would have seemed impossible before the war. A merchant who bought 100 bales of cotton in Texas for around $13,500 could sell them in New York for $54,000. The markup was incredible, and it concentrated enormous wealth in the hands of the men who controlled the trade. But this prosperity came at a cost that wasn't measured in dollars. The entire system depended on the labor of enslaved people, those who planted, tended, and picked the cotton in the first place, and those who loaded and unloaded the heavy bales at every stage of the journey. Their unpaid, forced labor made the whole enterprise possible, though they saw none of the profits and endured conditions that were often brutal beyond description. The teamsters and wagon guards, though free men, also suffered. Many died on the trail from accidents, disease, heat stroke, or violence. Their graves, often just unmarked piles of rocks beside the wagon ruts, dotted the route. The wagons didn't return empty. Matamoros had become the Confederacy's back door to the world, and through it flowed the supplies the South desperately needed. British-made Enfield rifles, considered superior to many weapons manufactured in America, arrived by the crate. Percussion caps for firing weapons, ammunition, and precious gunpowder, all things the South struggled to produce in sufficient quantities, made the return trip north. Beyond military supplies came items that improved the lives of civilians and soldiers alike. Medicines that could save lives, coffee to boost morale, cloth for uniforms and civilian clothing, and all manner of manufactured goods that the blockaded South could no longer obtain. Military officers in San Antonio would wait eagerly for the wagon train's return, knowing that the supplies they carried could mean the difference between an army ready to fight and one that could barely defend itself. A soldier in a Texas regiment waiting for a supply shipment might have written home. "We heard the wagons from the border arrived yesterday. We are to receive new rifles and proper ammunition at last." The boys cheered when they heard the news. These Enfields are said to be fine weapons and will finally be properly equipped. The Union wasn't blind to the importance of the Cotton Road. Federal commanders recognized that as long as this trade route remained open, the Confederacy would continue to receive supplies and money. Plans were hatched to invade Texas, to seize control of the border, to cut off this vital economic artery. But cutting the Cotton Road would prove far more difficult than anyone in Washington imagined. Texas defenders, fighting on their home soil, would show a fierce determination to protect this lifeline. The battles to come, at Galveston, at Sabine Pass, at Corpus Christi, would demonstrate that Texas wasn't going to surrender its connection to the outside world without a fight. As long as the wagons rolled south and returned loaded with supplies, as long as cotton bales floated across the Rio Grande into Mexico, the Confederacy in Texas remained viable. The Cotton Road was more than a trade route. It was hope, it was defiance, and it was the thread that kept the Texas war effort stitched together when everything else was coming apart. The next time you see old photographs of the Civil War, with its images of soldiers and battlefields, remember that the war wasn't just won or lost in dramatic charges and desperate last stands. Sometimes it was won or lost on dusty trails by exhausted teamsters coaxing one more mile out of worn-out oxen, hauling the white gold that kept an army fed, armed, and in the fight. The Cotton Road rolled on, mile after grinding mile, season after brutal season, carrying the weight of a region's hopes and the profits of a morally corrupt system, keeping alive a cause that millions were willing to die for, and that millions more were forced to support against their will. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next video in this series, when we'll explore how Texas defended its coastline against Union invasion, turning makeshift cotton-armored steamboats into weapons of war. and transforming a handful of Irish dock workers into the heroes of one of the most lopsided victories in military history. If you have anything you'd like to see us cover, please let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious